actually had a massive stroke on October 28th.
Yes, that's right. We read about that. 128 days.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, just what's going on with that? What is it like when you get a stroke?
It's different, that's for sure, especially a guy that has been focused on being intelligent and articulate and paid the bills by, speaking.
Mhm.
And so I got to a point where I was stuttering, to the point where I was almost incoherent. So I stopped talking. I've gone through speech therapy. I've been incredibly blessed to get back to, I'd say I'm probably 85% now. All my limbs work, everything moves around. So it could have been a lot worse. Literally, I was at death's door.
Wow.
Because it was actually caused by congestive heart failure, which I didn't even know I had. That created a clot that floated up to my brain, and boom, stroke. And even crazier, there's something called a 2% club for stroke victims. And what that means is I had my stroke while I was asleep. 98% of people never wake up from that sleep. 2% of us are still alive to tell this story. It's a very, very small minimal number.
What's it been like for you knowing something like that? Knowing that basically there was a 98% chance by all stochastics, by all probability, that actually you just never woke up. But in your case, you did.
It's humbling. If I didn't have faith before, I would certainly have it after that, on top of the fact that the human heart generally squeezes and pumps at about 65 to 75%. When it gets to 20%, it stops. Cardiac arrest kicks in and you die. When I was taken into the emergency room, I was at 23%.
Wow.
I was on oxygen level 7. At level 8, they put a trach in. I was that close to being dead.
Wow.
I think I had a lot of things going on concurrently. So to say that I have a new life on a new lease on life is an understatement. The statement of tomorrow is not promised has a whole new meaning to me. And the priorities of what matters in life has shifted astronomically.
So what did it shift from and to?
It shifted from work is all about let's go, go, go. It's about upward mobility. It's about doing whatever it takes. It was that, as an executive, badge of courage, I've got to put in as many hours as it matters to get the job done. Now, 4 things matter: faith, family, friends, and fun. If it's outside of those 4 buckets, it doesn't hit my radar.
When you said that there's stammering, one of the things I was gonna mention, but now I definitely will mention, because you said faith, is that one of the great stammerers of history was Moses.
Yes,
and
indeed.
He said and wrote and communicated a couple of things that people remember.
Maybe 1 or 2 things. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you're in company with that guy, that's the Stammerers Club is actually a decent club to be in.
It's not a bad one to be in. To me, that is far more impressive than the 2% even.
Well, let me take a little departure there and ask you, what is the intersection between faith and sales? And I know that your particular patch is sales enablement. It isn't the whole, broad, massive country called sales. But how do those 2 things touch?
Well, I think it comes down to, and let me say this, I'm a preacher's kid. I'm a PK. So everything starts with faith in my world. And how they come together is the same as everything else. There are certain things that I'm just not interested in doing. And I think a part of it has to do with how I approach things from an ethical perspective, how I approach things from a people perspective, and always have, and from an empathetic perspective, and understanding that my job is, in my mind, in my perspective, my job is to help to make just a little bit easier of a runway for folks. Better. I may not be able to make it easier, but at least the interaction to make it a little bit better than it was before I came in. And it's not just about making them bigger, faster, and stronger. It's how do I approach this from a empathetic and a humanistic perspective that makes me different than most leaders, from most executives, from most managers. And a lot of it is that comes from my initial foundation.
You had this, I'm looking at your bio, Roderick. The word training is showing up in like 03, 04, and then it turns and the word enablement shows up in 09. I'll tell you something about a lot of the folks who will listen to this and with whom we share these interviews and conversations. The vast majority of them are based in Southeast Asia. That's a collection of about 15 countries, right? Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand. And then we have certain enthusiastic pockets out of North America, Canada, Toronto, New York, Australia, India. So that it's a bit of a weird crosscut. Other than the United States and Canada and certain bits of Australia, enablement is not a word that is used commonly other than in multinational organizations.
Absolutely.
So that's a new frontier geographically. So conceptually, it's a new frontier in some of these geographies. So your bio starts using that word in 09. Can you just, for the benefit of people who aren't familiar with this important distinction, just say a word about training versus enablement?
Sure, I'll talk about those, and if I may address why it changed. I actually am the person responsible for creating the nomenclature sales enablement, and thus that has turned into the space that we're in today. Why it shifted is because to me, training is a sprint, if you will, not a marathon. Whereas enablement is an ongoing occurrence that's tied back to revenue generating, not NPS, not smiley sheets and butts and seats like we do with training. Training has very little reinforcement and tail behind it. And enablement to me is about a number of things. Enablement starts with talent acquisition and assessment. And then it goes into building out a role-specific onboarding for new hires. And next is all about role-specific guided learning paths of business acumen that is, again, role-specific, and that will prepare folks to have conversations versus giving presentations. To also be focused on business outcome conversations with companies that are around how do we help our customers maintain the customers they have? How do we help them mitigate risk? How do we help them increase productivity and efficiency? How do we also help to decrease pain? The other definite distinction between training and enablement is, and I always give a quick analogy. Think about an orchestra, right? You've got woodwinds, brass, percussion, etc. Now let's align that to a business, regardless of whether you're a startup, a mid-sized company, or even a Fortune 1000. You've got product marketing, HR, engineering, enablement, and sales, or even training. And we can put L&D in there as well, right? And they're all trying to do the right thing on behalf of the customer. But the problem is there's no collaboration. There's no true lines of communication. And there's no orchestration between all of those until one person or group, similar to the orchestra, steps up and taps the stand. And all that noise and chaos now becomes a beautiful sheet of music. That's enablement. We are about communication, collaboration, and orchestration. Think of us as the hub that spokes out to every other part of the organization. And because of your audience being multilinguistic, we are also the owners of dialects and translations. So I've got to be able to speak Spanish, French, German, Russian, etc. Why? Because each of those lines of business speaks a different language. So I'm not trying to teach them sales enablementese. I've got to learn theirs and then translate theirs into all of the other lines of business in their particular language. Does that help as far as
I
clarification?
love that, by the way. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna generously steal like operations ease and marketing ease,
No problem. Feel free to leverage.
inside sales ease versus outside sales ease. Those two dialects, which frequently don't
Yes.
understand one another. So okay, so let's just double click a couple ideas around enablement, because again,
Sure.
this is fresh for some folks. And I think it's maybe poorly understood even for some folks with titles that have the word in it.
Oh, it is.
So
I say in my book, if you ask 10 people what enablement means, you'll get 12 different answers.
right.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what training versus enablement means is different at every company, dependent upon where the company is in the maturation cycle of growth for that company. If you're in hyper growth, what matters? Onboarding. You're really focused there. As you grow up, now you've got to focus on, how do I get my managers to become leaders, and how do I get them rolled up so that they can now create more leaders versus managers. And then as you get later on into the enterprise space, now it's all about that big ticket relationship sell. How do I make sure that I have not only the right ICP of ideal customer profile, but even more importantly is, how do I have the right IEP, ideal employee profile? Because the seller at that startup is not going to be the same kind of seller that you need when you're talking to the older, I'll say seasoned gray-haired folks, right? Because they're going to look at those sellers, younger sellers, and go, I've got shoes and belts older than them. I need somebody that looks like they've been to a couple of picnics and rodeos before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. Okay, so, but enablement, well, one of the things that you were saying right at the outset, and I think this is tough for people who are accustomed to the standard fence lines or boundary lines, is we could call it sales enablement, but it immediately is starting to head into adjacent territory. And actually, probably if it's done right, it permeates the organization.
100%. It should be woven into the fabric of a company. And it should not be levied as, and with trainers, often they are the fixers of broken things and broken people. Something's wrong, throw training at it. We don't have enough pipeline, throw training at it. We're discounting too deeply, and because they can't handle objections and problems, throw training at it. And that's actually what I just walked through with you, is the conversation I had with my SVP of sales. And this is how enablement, the word and nomenclature started. That very conversation. And my response to him was, you train animals, you enable people.
I love that. I saw that in one of your prior interviews, and it's another thing, if you don't mind, that we're going to steal very, very generously and liberally from Roderick Jefferson, but that one also too.
For some copyright from you guys.
That's right. No, but I think that does draw an important distinction. I had a conversation with somebody who was the head of there's a program inside the US military where promising officer class will be drawn back out of active service and basically sent to West Point or some of their other educational areas. And they have a very clear nomenclature between training and education. And for training, it is what the ancient Greeks basically thought of as like beast of burden activities. Absolutely. Right? So it's like things you can do repetitively. Can you take apart your M16, oil it and reassemble it within X time? That's training. And education was the ability to help people make discretion calls to sort of backfill an entire category. So they had this distinction, but enablement is another thing altogether. It isn't exactly education either, is it?
No, it isn't, because it's both a science and it's also an art. And it's a matter of trying to balance those. And again, I look at training kind of like, these are the baseline things you need to know how to get the right answer. Enablement is about teaching people the right questions to ask, not giving the right answers.
How much do you do role play? How often does role play show up in your sort of enablement planning?
Oh, it's critical because there's nothing better than not just role play, but I also add in certifications and accreditations. The same,
Mhm.
stand and deliver, where you have a actual scenario type piece. And if you don't do that, you'll never prepare your sellers to actually have real conversations. You will only teach them to give presentations for spot answers or to ask answers so that you can move the sorry, my mind just flipped for a second, to be able to move them the sale along, right?
Yeah.
And I think in training, you're asking questions that are great questions, but about the company, what's going on, what's your pain, all these things.
Mhm.
But I think an enablement also adds another complexity. And it's the one question I've realized to sellers is always left out. And that's so, Mr. Mrs. Customer or prospect, what is in this for you that you will only be able to get by partnering with my company? Will it get you a promotion? Will it get you a larger vote or voice at the table? Will it get you moved into a whole other realm? But if we don't ask that, all we know is the standard sales questions of how do we uncover pain? How do we now create a compelling event? All the things that we were taught in training,
Mhm.
especially in today's world and time, where there has never been a more important need for humanity and empathy. What are you
Mhm.
selling right now? Shouldn't be selling products, shouldn't be selling solutions, shouldn't even be selling a platform.
Mhm.
If you're going to sell, the one thing you should sell is the relationship and the advancement of their company
Mhm.
by solving either what is your pain or what would you like to increase that you can only get by working with my company. That's the
Mhm.
single thing that we should be selling.
I'll tell you what, something that has happened in the last dozen conversations that we've had with people who have written books about selling, one form or another. Some people specializing in the cold call experience, some people specialize in the kind of intimacy of the near human touch and so forth. Everybody who's spent a long time in this has some epiphany that looks like the others, which is basically this boils down to values and character. And
100%.
what I just heard you say, it's like that's something that you could do for your whole life. You could do that into your 80s. You could stand behind something like that if you're brokering an agreement between two organizations at the end of which both of them genuinely say, well, I need this and I want this. I don't want it from someone. I want it from these folks in specific, or we want to provide it to these folks in specific. That's something you can like hold your head high about and go off and have a very rich lifetime of forging those kinds of agreements.
I
And
think
almost
sales is
anything
very
short of that
honorable.
is going to feel shallow.
I agree. I think that sales has gotten a bad name somewhere along the way by
Mhm.
unsavory characters, I'll say. But I think it's an extremely enriching and honorable career if you
Mhm.
do it right. We always have heard that people buy from people. Never
Yeah.
has that been more important than today because there is such a vast knowledge and a plethora of outlets where prospects, customers can go and get content. And I think what they're asking from sellers from now is empathy and context.
Mhm. Can you enable people with that? How do you close those gaps, right? So obviously you could get people to understand fresh points of content,
Mhm.
new ways of asking questions. What do you do when you see character gaps or value gaps? How
For
does that
me,
fit into enablement?
yeah, it starts in a couple of ways. One, again, I say that enablement should be a part of the interview process because one, we're looking at the potential employee as more than just can they hit the numbers, right? Are they going to be a cultural fit? We've got programs in place. Are you going to have a propensity to actually fulfill those pieces? And are you going to buy into our culture? And can you be successful here irrespective of where you were before, because you could have been a rock star there. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fit here. So are they going to fit in our selling culture? And the other piece is at the first line manager, the FLM. They are where the rubber meets the road. I believe that I can give you the best, most world-class programs, processes, platforms, etc. But if the first line manager doesn't buy into it and they're not a part of building all of this, it dies on the vine, because we need them to own the adoption, the execution, but most importantly, the positive modeling of what they're expecting their people to be and what they're supposed to do. Why? Because as the old adage goes, what's important to my manager is imperative to me. And what I see my manager do is more important than what I hear my manager say. If my goal is to be in their seat one day.
Just for my benefit, as well as some of the folks who are going to get this, just maybe define what an FLM actually is.
Sure, that's
like where they sit in the organizations and so on.
First or frontline manager. That's someone that has a direct management and team of folks that are sellers, and or in cases, it could be second line, which are folks that are managers of sellers.
So question for you then, like in enablement, your book, by the way, Sales Enablement 3.0, it's sales enablement. Why is it, Roderick, that it isn't just enablement? As in, why is it not engineering enablement, operations enablement, finance enablement?
Well, first of all, fantastic question. And you know what? If I had it to do over again, I would have named it just Enablement 3.0.
Really?
But what I was looking at is in Sales Enablement 3.0, it was the evolution of how we got to where we are today with sales enablement. And I believe where we're going is field enablement, revenue ops, because in my current role, I'm responsible for more than just sales. My title is actually VP of Field Enablement. I own all customer-facing sellers other than customer education. So I've got BDRs and SDRs, biz dev reps. I've got account executives. I've got technical sales engineers. I've got channels and alliances across the board. So everything other than customer education. So again, it should literally be enablement, but because what I was trying to do was chronically and succinctly show how we got to where we are, and literally my book is about the next version of where enablement is going.
Well, I would love to see your kind of experience and wisdom on what this means for other fields, because my suspicion is if we just parachuted you into an organization that had no sales force, I don't know what that organization is. They say it's like a public library or a charity or something, that so many of the instincts and kind of architecture that you've built actually goes straight to work for all kinds of other
that's why I love
sort of employment cases.
That's why I love enablement, is because we have a horizontal skill set. And what I mean is I can be talking to high tech, I can be talking to financial tech, I can be talking to education, I can be talking about a number of different spaces. And at the end of the day, they all have the same issues and same problems. They just call it something different.
Right.
Even manufacturing. I mean, you would think that is so diametrically opposite of, let's call it financial services or high tech. No, it's not. As a consultant, I've worked with each of those spaces. I look at it and go, oh, that thing you call, all right, this is what we called it over here. So now I know how to align to this. And by the way, you've got the same problem that high tech has. They've got the same problem that fin services and fintech has. Let's figure out the root cause of where the problem is and how to solve it.
So when you come alongside an organization that doesn't have this going, they say, I need to connect with Rod Jefferson and Associates and get some help on this matter. Do you have to basically finish that with leaving someone there with the title head of enablement?
No, not necessarily.
Is that sorry, go ahead.
No, not necessarily. Like, again, it comes down to where the company is in its maturation cycle. I've worked with companies where I've come in and put just the framework in place and then even interview to help them hire their first enablement person. And it's generally not ahead of, it's someone that's at a manager level, that is an individual contributor, that's going to keep things going until they get a more senior person as they grow up. There's been other cases where there's already an existing person ahead of, and that's where, from a consultant perspective, it's great to work hand in hand. It's not an or, it's an and situation of being able to bring my experience and my years of wisdom and even templates to be able to share those things. So again, it's not an or situation, it's working hand in hand collaboratively to figure out what's the best outcome for the particular company of where they are in their maturation cycle.
I'll ask you a selfish question. This one's for me.
Yes.
So Sage's reason for existing is we come alongside our clients and help them set up their academies or their university or their what have you, right? But it's like blank, fill in the name, academy. And a lot of organizations need and want that. Unfortunately, a lot of them feel like it's too fancy a thing for them to have until they get, 14 offices and 1,000 people. So we come along and help them figure that out. As you would expect, people see that as touching enablement. What is the connection between, for you, where does enablement and then the concept of an academy inside an organization, what area is covered and not covered by those two things?
Well, when done properly, they actually blend.
Yeah.
And I think a part of it depends upon how a company defines an academy and actually what's the charter of that academy. Because there's been companies where I've worked where we've actually had an academy in-house and have worked as an academy based upon curriculum paths, guided learning paths, all of the things that go in. So there's a blurred line between the two.
But obviously enablement is a bigger world because there can be a lot of things going on that don't have that kind of educational or training or upskilling component.
Oh, agreed. And that's why even across my career, I've had program managers in learning and development on the L&D side report to me as well.
Okay.
Because again, they are meshing. It really comes down to meeting the needs of, and I don't call them stakeholders because I think you're betrothing to, but internal customers.
Yeah.
And because what L&D needs is going to be different than what channels needs, will be different from what technical needs, and very different from what your initial first line biz dev rep or sales development rep needs. So, but it all has to come together. And then you've got to take things like, what are the soft skills that come into play, right? For qualification, discovery, etc. Then you take it up a level, and you also need to have a component of a sales leadership academy. So ultimately, it's really blurring even more so now than I've ever seen.
One of our favorite themes has been the I was going to say the marriage, but it's maybe the rocky marriage of marketing and sales. It's such a trope that you can kind of classically enjoy some of the dysfunction that happens there. In enablement, I think you must see, deal with, solve that tumultuous relationship all the time.
Very much, and it's literally the single point, going back to that hub again and spoke that I spoke of earlier. I think the biggest reason that there is friction between sales and marketing is far more simplistic than most think. It's because questions are never answered and there's a lot of assumption. And what I mean is, marketing says, we give you guys X number of leads, you never use them. Sales says, because your leads suck, we don't use them because they're horrible. But my question has always been, in the same room, at the same table, sales, have you ever actually defined and clarified for marketing what a sales qualified lead looks like? Marketing, have you ever asked why these leads are not being utilized and how can we be looking at them differently? It's
Yeah.
very simplistic, but very few times are those two brought to the same table and ask those questions. And when you do, the answer is generally, no, I thought they knew, or you know what, we've said this time and time again. But you would sometimes set it at them versus having a conversation with them.
Mm-hmm. This job of the enabler sounds like it's nearly the impossible job, Roderick. It's like you've got to be one part counselor, one part psychologist, one part influencer. It sounds like we're not talking about one human being.
And one part counselor, one part a lot of things. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And that's why I love it, because no 2 days consecutively feel like the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it really comes down to who am I meeting with? And when I say who, I mean not just the individual, but the individual, the level, sometimes the title, and then more importantly, what's their role in the overall come together and go to market piece.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get a little nerdy and a little technical around this for a sec, if you're okay with so suppose an organization hires a head of enablement. How's that person measured?
Oh, that's a great question. There are a number of ways, and that is looking at specifics around how are they helping to trim time to first close, and or we'll just call it revenue. Mm-hmm. How do we accelerate that piece? How do we also increase productivity per head of each individual? Mm-hmm. And then finally, how does this impact on, again, the collaboration and the orchestration between all of the lines of business? And every role has a different set of metrics. And just kind of off the top of my head, for sales, I'm looking at average deal size, collateral use and frequency, deal velocity, new pipeline, number of closed deals, quota attainment, win rate, loss rate. But then if I'm talking to someone like sales engineering, I'm like, okay, what's your number of customer meetings, number of demos per deal, how many hours are spent per deal, what's the number of win and loss again, what's the number of proof of concepts? Mm-hmm. And if I'm talking to customer success, then I'm talking about adoption rate, annual recurring revenue, customer churn, customer lifetime value, customer satisfaction, daily usage, engagement rates. It comes down to knowing your customers, as I said earlier, mm-hmm. and being that translator of dialects and languages and speaking to each of them in their language. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I think it's going to leave leadership who hire with a little trepidation. They hire a head of enablement. They're like, how are we going to measure these folks? And it's just the job by its nature, as you were just describing, has so many elements to it. And they're touching so many different people in the organization with outcomes all over the place that I think it's one of the tricky things for people. I'm particularly thinking in this part of the world where they're like, okay, I'll take a risk, I'll make some budget, I'll hire a head of enablement. How do I measure them? And then they can feel like this is a very difficult calculation to figure out, is that person doing a good job?
Or the lack thereof of their processes, their programs, and their platforms. And what I mean there is, is this individual helping people to get to revenue faster?
Right.
Check. That's a very easy box. You look at how long did it take to get to first close or second close before this individual got here, and how much have we trimmed down? Then you can take that at time X, the number of sellers, X the overall quota. Now you can tie that back to true hardline revenue metrics, right? How are we influencing things like clarity of our messaging and position? You would think that's just marketing. No, that's enablement, working with them to say, how do we take what you've got and again, translate that into sales speed? Mm-hmm. What are we doing for our legacy sellers beyond just the new hires? But what are we doing to sharpen the sword of the people that have been selling for a while? And what are the multiplicity of mediums that we give them an opportunity to learn with? So let's go back to the educational piece, right? We've got decks, we've got docs, we've got podcasts, we've got fill in the blank, right? All of these different things, because you've got all of these different learning styles. But most importantly, it comes down to, again, the focus on getting our people prepared, scaling our messaging and positioning consistently, and then validating that by stand and deliver accreditations and certifications and role play. It's not as gray area as it used to be.
Yep. I want to float an idea that I think is unpopular, but it's something that I've been seeing in my world, and I think you'll have a wisdom on it. I mean, you might hate it or you might love it. I'm interested. I don't believe that when you assess learner needs, that for junior folks, particularly in business development or sales roles, that they're a credible source for their own needs. One of the things that I've been seeing is that they just don't have the context or the experience or the background to be able to say what they're not good at, and so they end up self-assessing poorly. Either they, sometimes they're like, what I need next is super dogfight hardball negotiation tactics training.
I agree with you, by the way.
Okay. And then you're like, actually, my friend, what you need is like how to show up at work on time and, do the basics training.
It's funny. I actually wrote an entire chapter in my book on how to enable biz dev and sales dev as their first or second job differently than you do any other role in the company.
Okay.
I think where we make the biggest mistake is we assume too much, and we try and drop these junior folks into a moving stream in a company that we're all seasoned and we know how the processes work. We've done this 5, 6, 8 times. No, I think with them, you keep them in a space where they've been comfortable. They've been to university for 4, 5, 6 years. Keep them in that mindset. Give them what was essentially a syllabus up front so that they know what is expected. Make sure you've got office hours where they can come in and ask questions and they're not afraid to ask it in front of a broad set of other peers. Then there's other times where you want them with the peers so that you can learn from each other as peers and to say, hey, good, I'm glad I'm not the only person that didn't understand that. Now I give you an opportunity to do some role playing, and I want to get you as comfortable as possible here in the real world before I put you out in the real world. Then in university, what did we do? We went from 1st through 4th or through 6th if you've picked up your MBA. But each way, it was an algebraic build, just like mathematics. You start at the baseline of basic arithmetic, then you go into geometry, then you go into XYZ, trigonometry, and then you get to stats. And if you do it in a sequential fashion, guess what? Their brains are already programmed to think that way. Why change it? Just teach them how to do it inside of a corporate environment and a structure. To your point, sometimes it's, hey, you have to show up on time and you got to show up every day. And that's hard for some. Others, it's, I know we're on Zoom, but you can't come into the office looking like you were on Zoom, right? Others is, you don't come in at 9:45 when you were supposed to be here at 9 o'clock. And so along the way, if you are ingratiating these junior sellers into your culture, guess what? And you keep it along what they've been accustomed to, it's amazing at how fast they actually ramp up and become proficient. So I agree with you wholeheartedly and 100%.
Well, you didn't have to, but I'm glad you did, because it's not a particularly welcome message. The idea that you'd say, oh, some people, if you ask them what they should learn, they won't give you an answer you should use.
They don't know.
On the contrary, like, we do a bunch of work with law firms. A senior partner at a law firm is a very good assessor of their own skills. Now, Absolutely. They may assess a skill and be like, I'm garbage at business development. I don't care. I'm too old to care, and I don't want to learn. So there's like maybe a cantankerous old dog issue there.
Absolutely.
But they are very sharp and acute assessors of their own skill on balance. So there's something that happens as people sort of matriculate through their career, that they become a good sort of evaluator of their own condition.
I agree. And at the junior level, you don't know what you don't know. There's not enough experience to lean upon, right? And I always share a statement my mom used to say, a quote: either you learn how to or how not to. Either way, you learn, but one hurts a whole lot more than the other does.
Mm.
But I also believe that there's a great amount of growth and learning that comes from skin, knees, and fallings sometimes. You have to fail in order to be successful. Because if you've never tasted success, I worry about people and how they handle it when they do have to deal with that adversity of not winning or being the best of.
You speak very in very complimentary and admiring ways about your mom. She was obviously like a very intelligent person. I know that you said in a prior interview, not sort of formally pedigreed, but very shrewd and wise.
Now, my mom taught me things about life and how it applied to people.
Mm-hmm.
And she was always a respecter of people. It had nothing to do with titles. She used to tell me all the time. She asked me, do you know when your CEO goes on PTO or on vacation? I'm like, I have no idea. She said, oh, but if the plumber or the garbage person didn't come for 2 weeks, you'd know, right? And this was well before COVID, clearly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she'd say, think about who's really important in the big scheme of things, of making sure the company, it's not about scope and vision. It's about the people that execute on it.
Mm-hmm.
Titles are just something that we put on social media.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what you do, it's who you are that matters.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking with something like that, a lot of people can point to someone in their life. God, God help the ones who can't point to someone like that in their life. That's a sad turn of affairs. But a lot of people can, and there's efforts in organizations try to replicate that, and it seems like a very hard thing to institutionalize. Mentorship, or something like kind of an apprenticeship in something like the old sense, like a violin maker's apprentice.
Yes.
Like 7 years and now I become an honored member of the guild or the community. That seems to really evade corporate life, that you can't really do that. Have you seen that too, or have you been able to crack that?
100%. The corporate's about how successful can you be on day one?
Mm-hmm.
How fast can we get you ramped up? How fast can we get you productive? Because there is an investment in that individual, and there has to be an ROI on this individual in a short time frame. And so there really isn't the opportunity to wait for people to get there. And that's why companies are hiring more and more senior and seasoned folks, because the ramp time is so much shorter. But I think what we've done is we've really denigrated the junior side, because again, the senior people are like, you know what, you should know this, or I don't have time to teach you. Then how are they ever going to learn it?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're putting them in a situation where it's very difficult to be ultra successful unless you can find a sponsor or a mentor that is willing to share with you their experience. And when I say experience, I mean good, bad, and ugly. It's not all about unicorns and rainbows. It's not about everything is wonderful, but teach you the things that either A, no one ever taught them, or B, they've learned and are open and willing to share those things.
There's another couple of chaps. These are young guys out of Silicon Valley. I can't remember their names, Roderick, unfortunately, but they're the title of their book is The Sales Enablement Playbook. And one of the themes that they
Corey Bray.
Yes, Corey. Yeah, that's right. That's right. One of the themes that he pursues is the concept of disablement. And how one of the great missions and the jobs of a sales enablement person, or let's just say an enablement person, is to actually seek and destroy disabling factors inside an organization. What do you make of that?
Oh, I think that's part of our role as well. Because sometimes we have to break bad habits to teach new. And I don't mean just net new, but to your point, the old salty dog that's been doing this forever, just because it's worked doesn't mean that it's the best way to do it now, because it's done this, it's worked for you for 30 years.
Right.
Right. The other piece is as I said earlier, putting us in a position as enablement professionals to no longer be viewed as the brokers, the fixers of broken things and broken people, right? I think IT has that part worked out. I'm not going to step into their space. But instead, it's how can I teach you something different? How can I enable you a different way? How can I show you even a different way? Or finally, how do we take what you know to scale this? And one of the things initially I always focus on disabling is people, and especially sales folks, they move around perpetually. Agreed? Right?
Yeah.
But when they walk out of the door, what leaves? Tribal knowledge with them. So my job is to make sure that we have in place, how do we harness all of that tribal knowledge so that when an individual leaves, guess what? The experience, the content, the context stays here in-house.
So what are some of your favorite pieces in that tactics book? Saving tribal knowledge.
I can't give away everything.
Yeah, good. Well, we want people to do a couple. Honestly, no. I like this is not just in your case, Roderick, but we do want people to buy your book, and we want people to engage your organization and just get help. Because the temptation is to you're being humble about it, but honestly, this one of the things that we have seen as we run around and work alongside people and set up academies and so on is they should be seeking out help with professionals, and they should be gobbling up information. I mean, one of the things I frequently say is like, look, get an Audible subscription and just let everybody have access to these books. Like, leave books in the office. Absolutely. Get people sort of self-diagnosing and self-healing in the form of just consuming information. So even though you were making a joke, I'm totally in earnest about it. People need to pick up a copy, and they need to ring up your organization if they're serious about enablement. I cut you off though. I cut you off.
No. I appreciate that. In all seriousness, what I look at first and foremost are who are the best sellers, right? At each stage, who's the best biz dev rep? Who's the best account executive? Who's the best sales engineer? But I asked the question, why do you consider them the best? Is it just about numbers, or is it, this is the person that whenever there's a question, this person answers it? When we're onboarding people, this is the first one to put their hands up in the air as a mentor or a buddy, if you will, right? Those are the folks I want to talk about, because I want to find out what's made them successful. And I also want to hear from them, tell me some of your biggest failures. And if they can't find any, then they're not the right person for me to talk to. Because I'm going to learn from success and also from failure, because then I'm going to make sure that the people that come behind them don't step in the same hole and break their ankle the way that theirs did. So then what I'm going to do is harness all that. And then I want to put their name in lights and make them the absolute rock star. How do I do that? It's simple. Let's do some case studies. Let's do some podcasts. Let's go on and do like we're doing now. Let's go have a conversation so that we can now share that with the people coming behind you. And then if you've got templates, let's share those. People tend to believe that I am important because I do this, while I think the true helpers, especially in consultants, we believe that we are important and helpful because we do this. And what I mean is not harnessing everything, but opening up and sharing everything. For the right price, of course.
Yeah.
With the right investment.
Yeah, that's right. That's actually really interesting, the idea of internal champions. If it's tribal knowledge, then there's some other tribal dynamics going on, which is that you get tribal heroes. You get like the great hunter that keeps on, bringing the old stag back to the village. Well, that person actually provides more value than just whatever kind of meat they sling in. Yes. There's young boys and girls looking with awe at that. I mean, like, that's one day, maybe I want to
be them.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing I've learned over my career, Kevin, is most of the time when a sales leader, whether it be a VP of sales or a CRO, points me to who is their best, you know what best means to them? Those are the people that over exceed quota. But I've realized there are other components, because there are a lot of people that are top sellers that are just doing it all wrong. and some don't have the level of decorum that's required that I would ever want to replicate. And that's why I ask questions beyond how far over quota, how consistent are they? No, what are they doing to give back? What are they doing to help others along their journey to move upward and either at their level or above them? Because one, I'm working with a servant leader that wants others to be better. The other, I'm dealing with an ego that needs everybody to know how good they are.
When you say that, I have such a clear example in my head. There was this guy that worked for me, did really well. I was like, wow, he's bringing in deals fast. We were selling to private equity firms and hedge funds. These are sophisticated buyers, and it was expensive stuff. And I was like, he's onboarding some of these deals pretty fast, and they seem to be on really good terms. And he lasted a year, and I was disappointed when he went, because I thought, he's actually doing really well. Too bad he got poached. And then what I discovered very quickly was virtually all of his deals went away like, seashore sand, because they were completely built on handshake promises and things we couldn't provide. And they were just sustained by the oxygen that he would personally give them, sort of kicking the can down the road on various promises and things. And I thought,
can't scale that.
Oh, that's interesting. If you looked at his month over month performance, you'd be like, this guy's awesome. We need him teaching, right? That's the future of our sales organization. It was exactly the opposite. And the leading indicator actually was more like the canary in the coal mine. It's like the fact that he's so quick, the fact that these things are happening so quick, so fluidly, is actually an alarm. And that happened at the next organization he was at too. So it was a habit of his. But I think it was just as you said that, I was like, wow, is that ever true? Just the scoreboard is not enough.
I would venture to say it's at every company. Just because you're the top seller or closer does not mean you're the best person that we should replicate or scale.
That flew by the way. That's fun. That's fun chatting with you. What I would love is if you can make your way to Singapore one day. I'd love to sit down and we do this in person with some clients around.
Oh,
and if I'm in your neck of the woods, you're in Louisiana, right?
No, I'm San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh, okay. But did you grow up in Louisiana?
I did, yes.
Okay, that's what I picked up. Okay. Do you manage to make it back to Louisiana to see
frequently.
folks?
Probably once a year, just to go back and to ground myself and stick my hands in the dirt again and to remember where I came from.
Can I request that if we do meet in the United States, we meet in Louisiana, because it has this sort of Wonderland exotic appeal to me somehow, as a guy who's just never been in that part of the world.
Oh, we've got to get you down into the 504 area code of New Orleans. It's a very, very mystical, different kind of place than anywhere else on the planet.
Really?
So absolutely.
Wow. Cool. Yeah, I've got 1,000 questions about that area too. But we must finish this way, Roderick. Can you direct people for how you would like them most to find you?
Absolutely. I always say that if you can't find me on social media, you're not really trying. So on LinkedIn, Roderick Jefferson, on Twitter, @The Voice of Rod, on Facebook, @The Voice of Rod. You can hit me on email at info@roderickjefferson.com, or you can find me on Insta at Roderick_J_associates.